I used to act super tough, and I do mean act, when I was getting tattooed. And now if I hit, a spot that hurts a lot, I'll say something. I'll be
Yeah.
like, wow, that really hurts a lot.
Yeah.
Um,
I can tell you as a tattooer, nobody cares if you're tough. It's like, it's more embarrassing to pretend like you're tough than to just be like, man, this shit sucks, Like, because you could just tell it's all phony. Like,
Yeah.
it's exactly the cliche that you would think it is.
Yeah.
Like, the tough guys that come in all puffy, beating their chest, all this kind of thing. It's just like, man, just shut up and get tattooed. Like, nobody cares. I've been doing this 27 years. I've seen all you dudes. Like, I don't care. You're not impressing me. You know what impresses me? If you just lay there and get tattooed and don't act like it doesn't hurt,
Yeah. These are stories of outdoor adventure and expert advice from folks with calloused hands. I'm James Nash, and this is the Six Ranch Podcast. I was doing a little research, some light Googling.
On what?
On which country is the most tattooed country in the world today?
Ooh, that's a good question. I'm sure that has changed. I'm sure that answer was a lot different.
It's changed
10
recently.
years ago.
Yeah, it's changed recently. And it's actually a country that previously was, at least known to me as a country that didn't get tattooed very much at all.
Yeah.
And they've come on strong. So it is currently Italy.
Italy? I was going to guess something European.
Yeah. Italy is coming in strong at 48% of their population has at least one tattoo.
That makes sense. I think my first two guesses were either going to be Russia or Spain. Those were the two that I kind of had on the top of my head.
Sweden's number 2.
Really?
47%.
Wow.
Yeah.
I know a few Swedish tattooers.
Do you?
Yeah. I feel like if I was going to go to Sweden and wanted to make money while I was there, I'm not that connected, but there's, I feel like I know a couple people sprinkled throughout the world. I mean, there's people that are just world traveler tattooers. They know everybody. They could go literally anywhere they wanted, but thanks to Instagram, I've got probably one or two places I could go where if I wanted, but I kind of wouldn't want to work.
Yeah.
They're always like, oh, you can make a bunch of money and this and that. It's like, yeah, but that means I'm working and not hanging out in your country.
We do kind of get, I don't know, we start to just see like Instagram followers as a number sometimes, and we forget that they, represent people, and it can be a really large audience. When I just had a few thousand folks following along with what I was doing. I was traveling to teach elk hunting seminars and archery lessons, and just like peddling my knowledge anywhere that I could go, to make a little bit of money in the summer. But I'd do it on my motorcycle because it was so much cheaper, cheaper to ride, and I'd always pack camp. But if I just posted kind of where I was going and what my route was, there was inevitably somebody where I was stopping that was like, hey man,
crash by my place.
I got a couch.
Yeah. Right.
And I've put like 20,000 miles on that motorcycle now. Most of that travel is, going to events, whether it's shooting competitions or teaching seminars or whatever. And, I think I've only camped out like twice.
So let me ask you this. When you do the events, are you being invited to these, or are you putting yourself out there? Hey, there's an event. I'm going to see if I can't get in on it.
Early days, I was like inviting myself. I was just trying to kick down doors.
Right.
Now I get invited to more than I can attend, unfortunately. And I love it. I love that community, just like you probably experience at tattoo conventions.
Well, this is why I was asking, because I was wondering how similar the setup was and how what you do gets monetized in a situation like that. Because obviously for me, going to a tattoo convention, it gets monetized by me being able to tattoo at a convention.
Yeah.
Because there's a lot of fees. Even if they invite you, you're spending hundreds of dollars just to have a booth and all this kind of thing. So if you're not tattooing, you're losing money, which I've been in that position, which is kind of why I stopped doing conventions.
Yeah. I did a lot of the losing money part of it. But I gained some really wonderful relationships and connections. And I learned a lot. I learn, and this is probably unfair to the people that have come to some of these seminars, but I've learned more from them than I think they have from me.
Right.
So it's a tremendous thing for me to be able to do, because I benefit from it really well. But I've done it for free. I've done it where people buy tickets.
Right. That was going to be my next question. So with like the tattoo world, especially now, there's conventions now that don't involve tattooing. There's one big one that they do once a year, and it's all seminars.
Yeah.
They just bill all these tattooers, and there's no tattooing happening at all. You just go there as a tattooer, or I guess I don't see why a non-tattooer would go there. It's because it'd be expensive to just go there and out of curiosity.
I would.
It's like hundreds of dollars though to just hear about someone's techniques or something.
I would so do that, but I'm interested in so many things.
Yeah.
And especially when people like get into the weeds of something, I almost don't care what it is.
Yeah.
Tattooing is something that I care about, because I've been getting tattooed for over 20 years now.
Yeah.
And I think it's a cool thing. It's it's part of who I am.
Right.
And it's part of who a lot of people are. Tattooing is just a part of culture, and in so many cultures, and it's constantly evolving. But you have really been there at the renaissance of American tattooing.
I don't think I would go that far.
When did you start?
I started in the early to mid 90s. Let's say mid 90s.
Yeah.
But it was I would say the Renaissance was probably the generation before that. I would say if you were thinking about it in waves, I would be maybe second or third wave. I was sort of I kind of came up when guys like me that were maybe went to art school, had some sort of art background, were starting to get into it. Now it's like every person that gets into tattooing is an art school dropout or went to art school or whatever. That was not a huge thing when I started. I think I was among some of the first, probably I wouldn't say first. So I'd say probably second or third wave of people that was starting to become more common, where you'd see these younger guys, because I was 17, 18, and you would see guys that age, or maybe even a little older, that had some art training under their belt, whether school or, whether it was high school or art school after that, versus it just being a trade. A lot of guys, it was just a trade. They'd work at shops where it was, you'd pick stuff off the wall, and deviating from that wasn't really their forte, so they could do a tattoo that someone picked out off a design off the wall or the books in front and stuff. And that it was almost more like a trade. They knew how to do that stuff. They could do it well. And that was their bread and butter.
So people were shopping off of a menu rather than wanting a custom tattoo.
Yeah. Custom tattooing was pretty in its earlier stages when I started. It was off the ground and gaining momentum. But yeah, I would say I was probably on the towards the beginning end of it really starting to take off. When I was tattooing in Chicago back when I started in the 90s, there were maybe 2 shops that you would probably have called a custom shop. And when I say custom, I mean where that's pretty much all they did. There was really wasn't a walk-in type situation. Everything was appointment. Maybe 2 of them. I mean, God knows how many there are now. It's everybody that's got 2 years of tattooing under their belt's opening a private studio these days, and appointment only, books closed, all that crap.
Do you feel like they haven't really earned it yet?
I don't get I don't get too wrapped up in that kind of stuff that like I don't, as I say this, I probably do, but haven't really thought it through. But like I was going to say, like, I don't necessarily have a stance or a mentality about, oh, these kids have earned it or these kids haven't or whatever. Because there's a lot of, it's just different ideas of what you think people are supposed to have gone through. And it's just like anything. Every generation thinks the one after them had it so easy. You know, like, oh, we paved the way for you guys. Mm-hmm. And I'm sure there's old school guys that would think that about my generation of tattooers. Oh, you guys have it so easy. You guys have the internet. You know what I mean? Like I started tattooing when like the internet was barely a thing.
Yeah, it really wasn't.
Yeah. Like if we wanted to order a tattoo machine, you could probably, while we're doing this, get on your phone, order a machine, and by midnight tonight we could be tattooing each other. And that's what kids are doing now. Whereas when I started, you know, if you wanted, say, I remember there was a British tattoo machine builder, Mickey Sharp's. To get a Mickey Sharp's machine, you had to do all this international paperwork, customs forms, you know, like if you called, you had to, you know, call like in the middle of the night or something on, you know, our time to get a hold of them. And it was like a whole process. And it was like, and even to get those phone numbers, you had to know somebody, you know. Now it's just like, yeah, you want a machine? Just hop on Amazon, go to Walmart, you know, like that stuff's kind of crazy to me. Like, does that mean I earned it and kids today didn't? It's, you know, I don't really care that much about that stuff. I mean, in the way I look at it more is like, I don't necessarily care what they're doing. I'm glad I started when I started. Like that doesn't really bother me one way or another. I think it's a little irresponsible sometimes that people can just dive headfirst into it. But, you know, with no guidance, no anything, like it's a little irresponsible for places like Amazon and Walmart or whatever to sell tattoo machines, just not caring who gets their hands on them, what they're doing, you know, training, you know, and not just from a like, oh, you're making crappy tattoos on people, but just from a health and safety standpoint.
Right.
You got some, you know, kid that doesn't know the first thing about bloodborne pathogens or cross-contamination, things like that. And they're just, you know, and that's always a part of tattooing. I get it. Like, I mean, I started that way, but like with a little guidance, like I did my share of kitchen tattoos and things like that. But I also knew tattooers that were kind of in my back pocket. Like if I was really confused about something or making sure I did something right, they were like a phone call away kind of thing. So I wasn't flying totally blind. And that phase honestly didn't last that long. You know, I did a few handfuls of tattoos out of kitchens, and then I was kind of like, went right into an apprenticeship, was just at a shop. So,
and you draw every day.
I don't draw every day. I probably should. I mean, that's the thing, like, especially nowadays with Instagram, there's so much pressure in the art and tattoo world to do that, to draw every day. You know, I draw almost every day. I certainly do lots of drawings for tattoos. You know, it's a little different now. Just the setup out here is.
I guess I say every a little bit loosely, but
yeah.
You know, in a given year, 300 days plus, you're sitting down and drawing.
Yeah, I never calculated it, but a lot. I draw a lot. Yeah. I'll say that. I probably draw a lot, but it's like anything, man. There's always someone that's, you know, drawing twice as much or whatever it is you're doing. There's someone doing it twice as hard.
Yeah.
So,
but that's death by comparison. You know?
And that's one of my biggest hangups with tattooing and art in general, life in general, but especially those two arenas, because that's my career. And Instagram just makes that so much harder, that whole comparing game, because you just feel like, you know, you'll spend 3 days or something on a drawing, and then you go follow someone that does drawing. You're like, oh, they did 5 drawings in the time it took me to do this one. And it just like, it's all this hair splitting and just stupidness. And
yeah, that can become an unhealthy thing with social media. And I think that's one of the real drawbacks to social media today is people do use it to compare themselves with other people, and it's getting less and less fair all the time, because what you're seeing from somebody else might be very far from reality.
Yeah.
You know, the availability of AI images now.
Oh man, do we even want to talk about that? Because
yeah, I mean it's interesting, and I think it's something that's affecting both of us. But I've seen hunters posting pictures of animals with AI backgrounds from other countries.
For what purpose? Like bragging rights? Like why would someone do that?
I'm not sure.
Yeah.
I'm not sure, but I think it's probably because they got too tied up with a thought of like comparing themselves to somebody else. So they turn that into a competition that doesn't exist.
Yeah.
Whereas, and I'm not saying what I'm doing is right, but I don't focus on that at all. I like to learn from other people, but if somebody else experiences their version of success at something, that's going to be different from the way I would define success in that same scenario. So I'm not going to get tied up with like, oh, I'm not as good as they are, because they achieved this and I didn't. Whatever. I've got my own goals that are constantly evolving, and a lot of that is just like, how am I better able to personally enjoy this process and the result that comes from it.
Right. Yeah. I think that's the important aspect, is that, like, to me, I always come back to when I start really following down that rabbit hole and doing all the comparing, I always try and consider, like, well, what makes me happy? Like, sure, this person draws twice as much, or they're tattooing 7 days a week until the wheels fall off. And that's the thing, is like, a lot of people that do that stuff end up really great because they're putting in the time and all that kind of thing. But then I just think, like, well, is that really what I want? Do I want to be doing all that with my time? And what would, like you said, your gauge of success, like, what would that mean? Would I honestly at some point be like, oh, well, now I'm super awesome because I put all this time? It's like, that's never going to happen. Like,
Right.
I'm too critical of what I do for that to ever happen, where I'm going to be like, oh yeah, I put in the hours, I buckled down 7 days a week, this and that, and like, I made it, I'm the best tattooer ever. Like, no, I can guarantee you I could do all that and I'd still be like, shit sucks. Like, that's exactly what would happen. I know myself well enough. I've been doing it long enough. So my mentality is like, why torture myself?
Yeah.
Ultimately, I guess it's a much simpler way to phrase all that is like, it's whatever makes you happy. If you're happy going till the wheels fall off, no other outlets in your life, you just want to, hunt nonstop, you just want to fish, you just want to tattoo, whatever it is, at the cost of everything else in your life. Like, if that's making you happy, then fine. And it's not hurting anyone else, then go for it. But I just have lots of other interests. Sometimes my other interests are sitting around and doing nothing, which sounds, I guess, sad to some people. But like, there's times when I start feeling lazy that's something I'm doing, but then I'll kind of like look inwards and just be like, yeah, but I'm so relaxed right now.
Yeah.
Like, I'm genuinely happy right now, just like staring at the mountains on my balcony or something. Like, I'm not really doing anything. I'm certainly not making art. I'm not really tackling any big issues in my mind or anything. And, and there's times if I do that sort of stuff, my instinct is to be like, well, I'm wasting time, right? I should be doing this, should be doing that. But then if I pause for a second, I'm like, yeah, but I'm actually kind of happy not really doing anything right now. Like, I'm okay with this, doing that 10 days in a row, probably not great. Then there is a breaking point with that stuff where I'm like, okay, I got to get a pencil moving or something.
Something I talk about, and these aren't my original ideas. I'll throw that out there right off the bat, but something that I talk about with like the mental management of performance, and you can apply this to just about anything. I often apply it to shooting when we're talking about shooting, but you could apply it to anything. There's sort of 4 boxes that you can move a skill through, and the bottom one is unconscious incompetence. So those are the things that you're bad at. You don't even know that you're bad at it.
Right.
Like, we've got lots of those.
Yeah.
And then as you get a little bit better, then you have conscious incompetences. So you know that you're incompetent at it. You're aware of that. And if you improve a little bit, then it becomes a conscious competence. So you're competent at the thing and you're aware at it, but you've got to think about it. You've got to focus on it. And if you keep working on it, then it becomes, what we call muscle memory or whatever.
Right.
And now that is an unconscious competence. Like that skill is on autopilot. You've got it, but it's tough to keep something in that box. Like you have to continue using that skill to keep that conscious competence. The more skills that you get into that box or components of a skill, like tattooing or like shooting, whatever, if I have every aspect of long-range rifle shooting as a unconscious competence, like it's all on autopilot and I'm good at all of it, what it takes to do that can cost you everything. It can cost you your relationships. It can cost you everything else in your life because it takes so much from you to be able to keep stuff there.
Yeah.
And another thing that I've realized is that any component of a skill can disappear from any one of those boxes and reappear in another one. So something that was an unconscious competence can immediately and without you becoming aware of it become an unconscious incompetence. It's like, oh wait, I suck at that all of a sudden. Like what happened?
Right. You get rusty.
Yeah. So I guess that's why I bring up that you draw a lot, because I've seen a bunch of your drawings, and to me, they're very unique. Like it's a signature. I could see one of those drawings on a billboard in a foreign city, and I would know that it was you that did it.
Yeah.
It's your signature in so many ways, and I think it's super, super interesting. And I love when you put those videos on your social media so that I can watch and kind of see how that process unfolds.
Yeah.
It's fascinating to me.
That's honestly about the only thing I like about Instagram. Well, one of two main things. One, I just love doing those videos because they keep me being productive. They're in no way meant to be. I was a little nervous at first because I'm a very not show-offy type of person, especially when it comes to my art. And so I didn't want people to interpret it as that. And I realized pretty quickly that they don't. I think just people use social media platform. It doesn't always mean you're then declaring like, I'm awesome, check this shit out. It's more just like, well, check it out if you want to. I'm just doing this thing, So I kind of let go of that idea and just enjoyed making the videos. And the other aspect of Instagram that I really came to enjoy was just meeting other artists. Like there's artists now that I've shifted from the Instagram world just to my personal life, because I'm hardly on Instagram anymore. So say I started chatting with them via Instagram and I just get to a point like, hey, I'm never on here. Here's my cell phone number.
Yeah.
Like, let's just chat when you want to chat. And so now I've made some really great relationships with other artists that way. And so that's a really positive thing that would not have happened in any other context besides Instagram. Or same thing, like I mentioned earlier, like with knowing someone in Sweden. Like that would never happen. I mean, the only way that would happen is if I was a traveling tattooer and met them at conventions and things like that. So that can happen in other arenas, but I just don't do that stuff. So for me personally, Instagram would be the only way I'm going to connect with someone halfway across the world.
Yeah.
But as far as like surfing through it and stuff like that, I really don't do that anymore. If I hop on, I do those live sessions, and they're great because they keep me really productive. I just like you end up glued in your seat just working, because not so much like, oh, all these people are hanging on my every word or anything like that, because most of the time I'm just bullshitting, and but even if there's two people, it just gives me that much more of a reason to just sit there and keep doing it, instead of just getting up and getting something to eat or playing with the dog or whatever, like I'll just sit there for hours sometimes. And there's like a couple people that will follow me and I recognize the names and everything each time. And I'll do them for like, 5 hours sometimes, and into the wee hours, it'll be like 2 a.m. when I'm wrapping up. And there'll be like these same 2-3 guys that have been watching me for like the last 3 hours of it.
Oh, cool.
Yeah. And there's also a neat shift too when you do it for that long, because I usually start them late. I enjoy drawing at night. So I'll start them at like 10 p.m. And there's a shift, like when I get to like 1 a.m. or something like that, there'll be a like a second wave of people that start watching, and they're from just other parts of the world, and they'll be like, hello from India and stuff like that. I'm like, oh, that's wild,
It's so crazy.
Yeah, like I've had a few, like I can think of like all kinds of crazy places, not crazy, but crazy to me. I mean, that again is another advantage of something like Instagram that wouldn't happen in any other capacity.
Yeah, it is amazing. But before all that, okay, there's a couple questions that I want to get to.
Mm-hmm.
And I try not to have too much of an agenda, but I've got a little bit of one today. Otzi, what do you know about him? The mummy that they found in like Sweden or he's one of the oldest individuals that they've found with tattoos. He was a hunter.
Oh, okay. Yeah. I don't know anything. This is all news to me.
Oh, gotcha. Yeah. Well, one of the oldest mummies that we've ever found was this really well preserved dude.
Is this a recent discovery?
No, it's been a while. And I should know more about it if I'm going to talk about it. But he had tattoos all over at like acupressure points, and they think that it was probably medicinal.
Yeah.
He also had a arrowhead in his back, so somebody had shot him.
Oh wow!
And he died in this glacier somewhere in Europe. And but tattooing is an old thing.
Yeah,
it's been going on a long time.
Well, it's interesting that you would mention the concept of like pressure points and stuff, because my client today and I were having that conversation as I was tattooing him, because I run into this so often. The conversation usually starts with, I'm working on some area, and they'll be like, oh wow, I can feel that, I'll be tattooing their leg, and like, oh, I can feel that in my shoulder or something like that. And then we just got into that exact type of conversation where I was tattooing some spot and he felt it somewhere else, and how to me it's just like, not that I needed proof, but like that it's proof of how all those meridians are connected through your body, that you put an acupuncture needle in your ankle and it helps with your wrist or something like that, and I think tattooing, if someone was doubtful, like, get a tattoo, man, you're going to feel it in some weird places that you weren't expecting.
It shows up somewhere else, especially if it's a place that you can't lay eyes on while it's happening.
Oh yeah.
If I can watch it, then my brain, I think, kind of takes the wheel and says, no, that's happening, on the inside of your elbow. If you can't see it, then it's like,
they always
weird.
Try and guess. They'll always be like, oh, you're working on this part of it or whatever, and I'm nowhere near at all where they think I'm working on.
That
happens
funny.
A lot.
What's the difference between a good tattoo and a bad tattoo?
Oh boy,
I know there's a lot of gray in between.
Yeah,
but the reason that I ask is, there's a lot of people out there that are either about to get their first tattoo, they're about to get another one, they want to get a custom tattoo, whether they want it to mean something or represent something, or they just want to cover up part of their body, whatever it is. People without experience will often show up to a shop with a bad idea. And then it's a little bit late, and they can get put off when a good tattoo artist says, hey, I don't know if this is a good idea, and then can start to help them like turn it into something that will work as a tattoo. But how should people start thinking about like having that conversation and developing the idea of something that's going to look good on a certain body part?
It's such a complicated question to answer, because there's so many factors out of my control in a scenario like you're saying, where you're like, how do you guide a client? There's no accounting for taste. Everyone you could show someone something that I think is like the most beautiful piece of art, and they'd be like, I don't get it.
Yeah.
Just not, they don't understand. So there's like a collective taste in certain arenas that just aren't going to jive with someone, no matter how good I maybe am set that it's like a great piece of art. It's just like anything, oh, here, check out this band, they're amazing, and you are 2 seconds in, you're like, this is crap, so it's really difficult to try and tell someone that an idea is bad or something like that. So in the instance where, if in the back of my head I'm thinking like, wow, this isn't really my thing or a great idea, my goal then is to do the best version I can of their concept. Mm-hmm. If it's really something that then you have a whole other arena where there's things that just aren't translatable, or maybe their idea, isn't translatable, where sure, that sounds good on paper, sounds like a cool concept, but in practice, that's just gonna, maybe it's an issue of longevity. Oh, hey, I want this tiny little writing or something, stuff like that, where just from a purely technical standpoint is just not going to last. It's just going to be a mess, in the next 5 years, that kind of thing. But yeah, it's, as far as like drawing a line between good and bad, it gets so murky because there's just so many different ways to consider something good or bad, and so many different tastes. And
how would you prefer somebody start the conversation? Like if somebody wants to get a tattoo from you, then what's your guidance for like how to even start that process?
Well, my ideal way that I like working is when someone has a concept, subject matter, whatever you want to call it, that is in my wheelhouse. They don't have a ton of references, and they just want me to do my thing, right? They've seen my stuff. They understand what my style is about. They have a pretty good notion. That's why they've come to me. And it could be something as simple as like, hey, I'm thinking of some kind of bird or whatever on my arm. And then from there, I can be like, all right, well, let's narrow it down to like what kind of pose are you thinking? And I, like, for instances like that, I have like sort of a list of questions in my mind that sometimes they haven't even thought about. And it just makes my job easier. So, but not everyone's like that, right? There's people that just found a thing and they're like, here, do this. And that's something out here that I do a lot that I didn't do in Chicago, because I spent my entire career in Chicago. So the last 15 plus years of my career were just people that were basically just seeking me out because they liked what I did. Out here, people don't even know what I do. So they don't care. I'm just the guy that has a shop in town, and they just hand me stuff. Here, do this. I've had people like while I'm tattooing them are like, oh, do you design tattoos? Like, what do your tattoos look like? Like, they don't know because I'm just there and I'm convenient, which I understand. Like, I get it. That's fine. It's just kind of a different side of tattooing that I haven't done a lot in, the last 20 years. So like my experience working in Chicago was more like pretty much everyone that made appointments with me, it was typically bigger stuff. Half sleeves I did a lot of like half sleeves, like upper arm or forearm half sleeves. That size was kind of like the smallest type stuff I would do, so like a 2-3-session tattoo.
And how long would a session be?
I found that most people I worked on were right in that 3-hour range.
Yeah.
And I think it's different if someone's traveling, but a lot of my Chicago folks were from Chicago. So they're like, they would just book a few because they're like, well, I live right here. Why do a 7-hour session? So like when I look at Instagram and stuff and see these huge, where they're doing 10, 12-hour sessions, I'm like, I'm not into that.
Dude, I really stop having fun after 3 hours.
I stop having fun doing it after. Like, it depends. I think once I switched to like doing black and gray, that my endurance for that went a lot further because there's less like mental gymnastics going on. There's still plenty to think about and worry about and plan for and all that kind of stuff, but less than when you're doing color. Like color would wear me out because there's so much to think about, and it would be kind of mentally exhausting on a big piece to just have to juggle all that stuff in my brain. Whereas like I could do a 6 hours on a black and gray piece and not feel nearly as drained if it was a big color piece.
Have you seen those stats about how many calories people burn during chess tournaments?
No.
It's staggering.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah, some of these,
I believe it.
Some of these guys are going through like 5,000, 6,000 calories a day, using their brains.
I believe it.
And if you start adding in different dimensions, like color as opposed to grayscale, then I could easily see how that would be a lot more taxing.
It's a huge factor. It was for me. Some people seem to be able to adapt back and forth no problem, but I was definitely way more worn out. Yeah, there's days if I do a 6-7 hour session, I come home, I just feel physically beat, you know. I'm just like, well, I didn't do anything really. I sat in a chair, you know. Like, I mean, sure, sometimes you are like hunched over too much, so there's a sort of a physical component, but like it's more the mental game. And again, everyone's wired differently. I think there's scores of tattooers now that just do all day stuff and just seem to just do that nonstop. You know, there's guys that'll like have someone come out for 3 days in a row and do a full sleeve on them. Yeah, and that just baffles me. I mean, those are like some top dog type people, but
I think a lot of people don't realize how many hours go into something like a sleeve.
Yeah.
It's a lot, dude. Like you're not gonna roll in and be like, "Hey, I want to get a sleeve done today."
Yeah. I think all the shows kind of skewed people's perception of that. Yeah. You know, because there's editing, and in a half-hour episode, someone's got a sleeve. But I think in general, there's a lot of unknowns for people, and when they come in, like I run into that quite a bit, especially now living out in the middle of nowhere. Like people that want to travel, and they're just like, they'll do that stuff like, oh yeah, I want to get a sleeve, I'll just book 3 days in a row. And there are tattooers that can do that stuff. I'm just not one of them. I'm very upfront with people because, like, for better or worse, I just don't want the work to suffer. I don't have anything to prove. Again, it's like it's like the comparing thing, right? Like I could be like, well, so and so can do it, I'm gonna buckle down and do it and try and do a sleeve in 3 days. I guarantee you 2 hours into day 2, I'd be like, I'm toast. Yeah. Like I can't even think straight. Like this sucks, which might sound, wimpy or whatever to some people, but it's just how I'm wired, Yeah. I kind of almost don't know how I've managed to continue to do tattooing because it does require so much focus for so long. And the other thing that it does that I'm not good at all outside of tattooing is you have to like ignore things that say if you were just at a drawing table in your house, no pressure, whatever, just doing a drawing, some factor that would drive you bananas in that situation, when you're tattooing, you just have to like power through it because there's a person sitting there, right? I'm trying to think of a good example. Like it could be anything. For me, it's anything. Like it could be, I mean, now it's a little different because I have my little studio and I have so much control over everything. But like in a group shop where there's other artists, someone could put on like some crappy music, right? And you're just like, oh my God, this is driving me bananas. Like I can't even concentrate, but you just have to like power through. Like if I was at home and some stimulus like that threw me off, I could just walk away. I could be like, I'm done. This is totally distracting. Forget it. Yeah. But you can't do that. No. Like there's even little stuff. Like I'm a total perfectionist, and I was actually doing this today. So I put down like covering on my table, like a barrier film on everything, and I tape it all down, and I was looking at one of the corners was a little buckled, and I was like almost done setting up, and I was like, I'm going to have to peel all the tape off and like tighten that up. Yeah. If I need to do that. And I thought to myself like, it's not that big of a deal. But then I'm like, you know what? That's going to bug me this whole session. Yep. If I see that little bubble, that little buckle in my, so stuff like that, like, little things will really throw me off. But like if I'm tattooing, like there's times I just have to like grit my teeth and just be like, okay, I got to try and tune this out. And like I said, it's a little different now because I have my own shop and I'm like in control of a lot of that stuff. There's not a whole lot of elements that I can't mitigate, but yeah, working in like busy shops, it can be really distracting sometimes because there's so much to think about with tattooing, so much going on in your brain that has only stuff you're thinking about with the tattoo. And then you throw in some like crap music and you're just like, oh my God, like turn this off. Like that's why I keep my playlist like so mellow. Like one, it keeps people relaxed, and two, I just don't have to think about it. Yeah. I don't have to have a outside stimulus. I don't have a very good just tune it out feature in my brain. I wasn't like wired with that. Some people are great at that. Like there could be anything happening and they're just so laser focused that they can tune all that stuff out. I'm not a good tuner outer. It just doesn't. It's not in my wiring. I think it's an advantage in a lot of situations. Like when I'm outside enjoying nature, I think that's a huge advantage to be hyper aware of your surroundings. It's like, like with what you do with hunting and stuff. Like you can't just go like, you're in tune with everything, right? Because you have to be and you want to be, right? And it's like,
and that's how we're wired, right?
Yeah.
We grew up, like our species grew up needing to pay attention.
Yeah.
And
I thought you meant you and I are wired. Like, you meant us as people.
Meant Homo sapiens.
But I don't even think maybe that has changed. I think evolutionarily speaking, you're right.
It's changed
because now it's totally changed.
We have a lot of new stimuli, and people have increasingly been put in situations where there's so much going on around them that if they don't block it out, then they get overwhelmed.
Yeah.
So for the people that that can't block it out, that do get overstimulated, they're probably just more in tune with how we developed as a species. And I think that's really important. It's a really important skill to maintain, but it can set you up for failure in situations that have a lot going on.
Yeah.
I find it really painful to go to like a concert. There's so much going on around me. There's so much stimulus that I'm just not having any fun. And it could be a musician that I really love, and it's like I would just rather go sit in my pickup and listen to this.
Yeah.
Because there's more going on around me than I can take in. So it's too much, and I'm not having a good time.
Yeah, that's like in that example, I could picture myself like being at a concert and someone like behind me is having a conversation, and I will just lock onto that, and I'm like, oh man, I just need them to shut up. Otherwise, what is the point of me even being here?
Yeah.
It's exactly stuff like that. So when you're hyper aware, those are that's when it's a disadvantage, because you just can't like muffle out the rest of, what's going on. But I think it's a huge advantage when I'm like, just, out trying to enjoy nature, because I'm soaking so much stuff in.
Yeah.
But another thing like that's interesting is even within that, and I've learned this a lot with like what Jenny does, is like I've learned that even within that blanket of like being aware, there's different types of awareness. Like specifically what I'm thinking of and getting at is we talked a lot about like search image. So like when we go out, she'll just look and be like, oh, there's 4 bighorn on that ridge, and I'm just like, I don't see them.
Yeah.
But I'll be like, oh, look, there's a praying mantis 8 feet into the grass there, and they're like, what? And I'll just go dig through the grass. I'm like, it's right here, like, because I just have a totally different search. My search image is super like microverse, very, very up close. I really love the idea of discovering things that are like within 5 feet of me. Snakes, frogs, salamanders, any manner of insects, all that kind of stuff. So when it comes to elk and, in a hunting scenario, like garbage. I don't have it at all. Like I've had Jenny like giving me practically coordinates, like right next to that, see that like pine tree there on the top of the ridge, like go 1 over and then up 10 feet. And I'm like, and sometimes I do, but sometimes I'm like, I just don't see it. And part of what's frustrating about that too is like, she just looked over there and was like, oh, there they are.
Yeah. And
here she is like, she just saw them naturally. And here now she's explaining to me exactly where they are, and I still can't see them, So I've noticed that a lot. I've noticed that a lot out here, which makes sense, because there's a lot of hunting, a lot of people, are into that. So their whole awareness and search image and just the range, like living in Chicago, it's like you don't even see more than 50 feet before there's something blocking your view.
Exactly.
So you come out to a place like this and it's like, oh yeah, I can see for miles.
Yeah.
And it's just not something my brain is even used to being able to do. There's like always something in the way. Even when I go out and do like a hike, say like when I was living in Chicago, my outdoor experience was always like going out to the burbs, but there's no topography. So you're never like up on a ridge looking out over anything. You're always ground level. And before too long, there's like trees in your way, even if you are somewhere natural. So yeah, my search image is just like super, super close, which I love. I mean, that's my thing, I love elk and bighorn and all that, but like if I had to choose, what I wanted to spend my time, it's like, I'd rather go dig through, a 3-foot square block of prairie than go like looking for elk, because I'm going to find probably 100 different kinds of insects or, whatever in that little block. So yeah, I think that's interesting how people, even in the realm of hyper awareness, have different focuses of where that hyper awareness goes.
Totally. Yeah. I can see the bend in an elk's leg in a stand of timber 2.5 miles away while I'm driving 60 miles an hour down the road.
Right.
I was hunting in Colorado with my friend Tim Butler a while ago, years ago, and I was glassing across this canyon. I was looking about 6 miles away into these parks that are up there. That's what they call meadows in Colorado. I was glassing these parks, and Tim goes, "There's an elk." And I was like, "Shit! How did this guy see an elk before me?"
Right.
And he's from Maine, and I said, "Where?" And he was looking into the aspens that we were sitting in 30 yards away, and there were elk right there.
Yeah.
And I was looking 6 miles away and had completely missed them. But all of his hunting had been done in the North Woods, where he could never see very far. He was used to looking for stuff very close. So that was to his strength. And then, later on in the trip, I was seeing stuff that was miles and miles away. And he's like, "What? How?" It's like, it's different what you're used to. And I think that search image, having something in your mind already, like that stamp seared in there of like, this is what it's going to look like, really helps. And that's one of the things that makes bear hunting really difficult, especially around here where our bears can be just about any color. There are so many things that look like a bear out there. Right. Our bears are blonde and black and brown and red and orange. And, a bear can also turn himself into just about any shape. Yeah. So, the things that we're used to using, being like shape and color, no longer serve us that well. Right. And then you get into a place that's burned and the hillside is just littered with black stumps and brown bark. And it's like, oh my gosh, this is hopeless.
Yeah, they're everywhere.
Yeah.
There's bear trees all over the place.
Bear hunters against black stumps. That's the club we started this spring.
Yeah. But it is, when you were talking about the sort of hierarchy of learning, behaviors and stuff, it is a learned behavior. Totally. It's something you have to, and it's something that you can get rusty at, just like you were talking about. Like you could, I know that if I go a season, like I got really into bird watching years ago, and if I go a season where I haven't done much and then I go out, I realize I can be rusty just with like my species, but also just with search image stuff, where I'm just like, oh yeah, I'm looking too close or too far or whatever. It is a skill just like anything else that you have to hone. I think it helps just like anything else the more you practice it. So like I always, like I said, I keep my sort of sweet spot as always like the microverse. Like I love insects. I love looking for them and stuff. And it's funny how it's so parallel with like when Jenny and I go out and I'm like, how did you see that? Whatever, and then I'll see some like tiny little, and she's like, how did you see that little insect? Like we have just two totally different scopes of where we're looking. So but you have to practice it. And then once you I always like that moment when you say you go out and you're like, oh, I'm going to try and find a something or other. And then when you finally see it, you realize that you were looking for something totally the wrong shape. This actually happened to me down by the lake. I went out a few times looking for pygmy owls. I just heard that they were down there, that they've been spotted or heard or whatever. And I went down there a few times looking for them, thinking like, well, what are the odds? It's a tiny little owl. But in my head, I had this vision of how tiny they were. And then I actually saw one and they were like even tinier. And I was like, oh, I was not even like the search image I had in my head was not even close. Like I was looking for something 3 times bigger, which was already still small in my mind. But when I saw them, I mean, they're like the size of a pop can.
Yeah.
So when I saw it, I was like, well, no wonder I never saw one,
Right.
like when I was actually looking for them. They kind of stumbled on me, honestly, when I did see them. So that's like, I wasn't even there looking for them. I went down there fishing and they like flew right in front of me.
Cool.
I was like, holy shit, that's a pygmy owl. Just
Cool.
landed in a branch like right in front of me. And I was like, oh yeah, I was looking for something like this. And they're like,
yeah,
so
that's awesome. I like bugs too, especially aquatic macroinvertebrates in rivers.
mm-hmm. Well, right, because you tie it into fishing.
Yeah, but it was an interesting path for me because I started fishing because, I think as much as anything because it was an outside thing that I could do that wasn't necessarily like the bloody knuckle work of ranching
Right.
as a little kid. Like this is the treat. This is
Right.
what you get to do when you're sort of caught up on work. You get to go
Yeah.
fishing. And I went from bait fishing to fishing with lures to fly fishing. And then, by the time I was in college, I was so dedicated to fly fishing and fly tying that it was most of what I thought about. And it came to my benefit at the end because I was tying flies for the chancellor of the university, and he had moved to that college to be chancellor there, partially because it was such excellent trout fishing.
Oh yeah.
And it was a kind of a funky schedule at that school. And by the time I was getting ready to graduate, I was one class short, and that class wasn't going to come up again for a couple of years. And I went to the chancellor's name was Dick Story, and I was like, Dick, what am I going to do? And he's like, well, I'll just sign for that. I was like, you can do that? And he's like, oh yeah. So he just signed it off so that I could graduate without taking that class. But
what was the class?
I think it was a literary theory class.
Yeah.
A professor had gone on sabbatical, so it wasn't available during the time that it should have been, so it just wasn't coming up in the course schedule for a couple more years. But the point that I was driving towards is I started becoming much more interested in the bugs than the fish themselves.
Yeah.
And now, fortunately, more people are realizing that these river restorations and these conservation projects, they really need to be managing for the health of the insects,
mm-hmm.
because if they have a healthy insect population, they're going to have a healthy fish population.
Right.
And that's something that's cool, and I'm glad that biologists are paying more and more attention to that. But where there might be 100 fish, there's going to be 2 million mayflies.
Mm-hmm.
Like let's concentrate on the mayflies, and then pretty soon you're going to have like better, healthier fish. But man, I loved going out there and taking a screen and kicking rocks and seeing what showed up and trying to identify the species and the subspecies in some cases. Entomology is a pretty dark tunnel. Like it's the only other thing that I could really compare it with in biology would be like the mycologists, the mushroom people.
Yeah.
There's so many different varieties of mushroom out there. It's shocking, and there are hundreds of species of mayfly. So I was never going to get to the point where I could identify all of those, but I loved it.
Yeah,
they're fun to watch.
As much as I'm into insects, I mean, that stuff can just, like, again, unless you have that like obsessive sort of mania about it, it can just be like, I love knowing what I'm looking at, but I do have like a breaking point where I'm like, okay, where am I even going to find what species this like 1/8 of an inch drab brown moth is?
Yeah.
Like, who knows if it's even been identified? Right. It's like there's certain stuff I'm willing to just let go because in maybe not fairness to that moth, it just becomes not as exciting to me. So it's almost like you're just sort of like the flashier and fancier the thing is, the more attention it gets. For me, I try not to like play favorites, but it's like if something like in bird watching where you're just like, oh, you like zero in on something, and then you're like, oh, it's just a robin, like that kind of mentality where you're just like, do I really need to spend time with this thing? And it feels, I always feel like unfair, like I'm slighting that species, because it isn't as flashy, or like in the insect world, the smaller you go down, the like you said, that like it's so hard to identify any of that stuff. I feel like if it's not like in a field guide or something that I have, I'm probably going to just have to let it go and not know what that thing is.
Yeah, and that's okay.
Yeah.
Like sometimes we can just call it a beetle.
Yeah.
There's lots of beetles.
Right.
But there gets to be a point where it's like, yep, you're a beetle.
Yeah, I mean that's so like in that example, like if I flipped over a log and there was like a shiny black beetle, I probably would be like, all right, it's probably some kind of ground beetle. That's probably good enough for me.
Yeah.
But if it was like bright red with like, orange polka dots or something, I'm gonna be like pouring through books trying to figure out what the heck it is. So,
do you have a tattoo that you've done, of the thousands that you've done in your career, that like really stands out as one that you're like really proud of, that you think was cool from a tech? They're all train wrecks.
Nope. People ask that all the time, and there truly isn't.
Yeah.
I've talked to...
There's 350,000 beetle species in the world.
Yeah.
That's a lot of beetles.
Yeah. I have a book called The Inordinate Fondness for Beetles, and it's really beautiful photography of just pinned beetles, like page after page. I mean, it barely scratches the surface, and there's hundreds and hundreds of them in there. Yeah, so it's like, right, you got to draw the line somewhere.
Yeah.
But yeah, I tattoo a fair amount of tattooers, not a ton, but like we definitely cross paths relatively often, and they're like, I think I'm realizing that like most tattooers and artists that I know are very critical, but even in saying that, I feel like most tattooers would have an answer for you. They would be like, oh yeah, I did this one, it was always one of my favorites or whatever. I remember having a conversation back in Chicago with a tattooer, and we got on that exact topic, and I was like, he's like, isn't it awesome when you like do something or you try some new trick and you're like, yeah, that's cool, I'm stoked on that. And I was like, no, that's never happened. He's like, what? And I'm like, I've never thought that ever. And he's like, you're kidding me. He's like, I definitely think that every now and again about my own stuff. And it was such a foreign concept to me. And I'll talk about this with certain artists, and they're like, well, why even do it then? Like, why don't you just quit if it's, you're not like, fun is always this word that comes up. Oh, you're working on anything fun? And I always have this same kind of explanation that like tattooing isn't fun to me in my definition of fun. Fun is like something carefree. There's no stress involved. There's no whatever. Like tattooing isn't fun. It's full of stress. It's, like I get sweaty just every time I'm about to start a tattoo. For as many of them as I've done, it's just like there's times when I'm like, oh man, you just don't know. You don't know till you start, and sometimes it's an uphill battle. And so yeah, I've never sat back and be like, oh yeah, I nailed that one. I think the closest it ever gets is a purely like a technical thing. So like sometimes if someone comes back and I see that it like healed really nicely, that makes me happy. And there's a certain level of like satisfaction, I guess, just that it like healed nice and smooth and there were no technical kind of errors. Doesn't mean I love the drawing, doesn't mean I like how I tattooed it, the design or anything. It's purely just like, oh, that healed up nicely, like that's great. Because there's nothing worse than like you already don't like the tattoo and then it's just like got a little chewed up or something, like those kind of things.
Yeah.
So that's the closest I get to being like proud of something or excited about it, as if it like from a technical standpoint. But even then I don't know what to do with that information, because it's usually weeks later and I'm like, I don't know what the hell I did that made that one heal up nice and smooth. There's like, I talk about this a lot with other tattooers where we get into all the technical stuff. And I think the frustrating thing with tattooing is there's no control group. Like if you look at it from the scientific method, there is no control group. Like you could set it up as close to the scientific method as possible. There's still going to be something that wouldn't be defined as a control group. The skin's always going to be different. The skin on a given person from area to area is going to be different.
Man, I heal differently based off of partially just how I'm living at the time.
Yeah. Diet, hydration, all that kind of stuff.
Stress.
Yeah.
The tattoos I have that healed the worst have all been during times where I was not doing mentally and physically well.
Yeah.
And I've never had a tattoo heal as quickly and as nicely as the one that you did for me.
I paid him to say that.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you. Earning my dollar.
Little plug.
No, it's true. But I'm in a really good place right now.
Yeah.
You're a good tattooer, and I think that those two things together really, really helped. So, I agree that there is no control, and it's going to be different person to person and one area to the next. But I think it often comes down to just how that person's living their life at the time.
It's certainly a factor, but like even using that example, if you're like, oh, these tattoos I had when I was like really in a bad place mentally, those ones didn't heal great. Maybe the tattooer was in a bad place mentally. Maybe they were having an off day. Maybe they bought a brand new machine and you were the first person they're trying it out on and they weren't in rhythm with their machine. Like,
maybe
who knows?
Maybe I called it a tattoo gun to start things off, and they got upset with me.
Oh, did they?
No.
Oh.
I learned that lesson a long time ago.
I mean, who gets upset about that? I mean, technically we don't call them tattoo guns, but like I wouldn't get upset with someone. I love hearing people's experiences with other tattooers.
Yeah.
Like I love hearing that stuff because I can almost always, this is not like tooting my own horn, but if I was going to take pride in one aspect of tattooing, like I know how to take care of my clients. I feel like I pride myself on really good customer service, whatever you want to call it, like making people feel respected and equal and comfortable and all that stuff. And I hear so many stories, like when people come in and they have a bunch of work on them from other people, and I'll be like, oh, who did that one? Like 80% of the time, there's some like bullshit story where they're like, oh yeah, they took 800 smoke breaks or stuff like that. Like, yeah, I called it a tattoo gun and they yelled at me. I'm like, why would you yell at a client? Like just all kinds of stuff like that. And then I think it made me realize more and more that like it is kind of rare to have customer service at the forefront of what's going on in your head. I think a lot of tattooers reverse that and they act like they're doing the client a favor. It's like, no, man, it's the other way around. Like you don't have a job if you don't have clients. So yeah, it's ridiculous. It's such a ridiculous notion to treat clients like you're doing them a big favor.
Guides do the same thing.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
I could see that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I trash on the Florida tarpon guides all the time, and I'm not going to stop because
just try and stop me.
Yeah, come on up.
Right.
No, they're really hard on clients. They've really developed that reputation, and I've had lots of fishing clients that show up and they'll miss a hook set or they'll get a tango or they'll break a fly off.
Yeah, they're apologizing
silly,
to you.
And they're like, oh my God, I'm so sorry. Like, it's okay.
Yeah, right.
Turns out I brought multiple flies today.
Yeah. Turns out this is my job, and part of my job is making this easier for you and making you not stress about stuff.
And it's like we're not out here trying to feed ourselves when we're fly fishing. That's just not what the thing is at this stage. So I often tell people the most important skill in fly fishing is enjoying it, and it's not, that doesn't mean that it's easy. You have to develop all your other skills to the point that you're getting satisfaction out of what you're doing and you're having a good time. But that is the most important thing, is that you have a good time. And as a guide, I want to help them achieve that,
right.
And I ask people, like, how would you define success for yourself today? And then I drive everything in the trip towards that. And whether that's fly fishing or hunting or whatever it is, that's what I'm driving towards. And you do the same thing.
How many definitions do people come up with when you ask that?
Lots. Yeah.
I mean, because if I would think just based on as a guide asking that to the person being guided, you would assume the answer would be like, oh, well, I want to catch a buttload of fish today. But sometimes you get answers that are different than that?
Totally.
Yeah.
Some people say, I just really want to catch a 24-inch rainbow trout.
Yeah.
It's like, cool. Me too. We don't have any of those. But
right.
in the beginning of the trip is the time to talk about that.
Yeah.
Because if I didn't ask and that was their goal, and then we fished all day,
and they're going to be bummed.
They're like, man, I just didn't find that fish that I was looking for.
Yeah.
If I have that conversation in the parking lot, it's like, okay, we don't have that, but this is what we do have.
Right.
Now the expectation is set, and I know that person wants to go out and catch the biggest fish in the river.
Yeah.
I can drive everything towards that. If they want to catch a bunch of fish, we're going to fish differently than if they wanted to catch the biggest fish in the river. Some people say, you know what, man? I don't even like fishing. I just want to sit on the side of the river and read a book. I'm like, cool.
You're like, you know, you can do that for free.
Do you want a chair?
Right.
Like, can I run to town and grab you a coffee?
Yeah.
Like, or people will be like, I'd like to perfect my roll cast. I want to work on my roll cast. Like, awesome.
Yeah.
I'm going to go to a part of the river where we're going to work on that.
Yeah.
And it's cheating on the test. And I'm all about that. I'm all about cheating on the test.
What do you mean? What's the test? Like
the test is a satisfied client at the end of the day.
Yeah. Right. But how's that cheating? It's just you're just giving them what they want.
Yeah.
I think it's a bigger mistake to assume you know what they want.
Well, that's what young guides do. They give clients the trip that they would want.
Mm-hmm.
So if your goal is to catch a bunch of fish, and that's what makes you happy when you go fishing and you're guiding, as a young guide, you're going to go out and try and get somebody a bunch of fish. And that might not be what they're after at all.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I did a trip in the Northwest Territories, and the guide didn't ask me what I wanted to fish for, and I had very specific goals in mind.
Mm-hmm.
He was just kind of like, well, we're just going to go do this. I was like, okay, and then you get afraid to like speak up that you're like basically the two species were lake trout and pike.
Right.
And I was just like, I really wanted to go for big pike. And I think that was a lot less common than people wanting to fish for lake trout. And so we spent so much time fishing for lake trout, which was fun. And I'm glad we did it. It was kind of my first experience catching big lake trout. But I could have done that for like one of the days and been fine. And then just spent the rest of the time hitting it hard for pike. But it was definitely the reverse where we spent so much time on lake trout, just trolling and all this kind of stuff. And I'm like, man, I just want to be in like a 5-foot deep bay, just casting for huge pike. And we only did that a couple times. And I kept trying to like tell him. And I was just sort of like, well, I don't think he was all that familiar with it or whatever. But I mean, I've gone out with guides a few times, and they can be they're like a rare breed. Like I would say the majority are like, I don't know, there's something like at least in my experience, like sort of a cockiness or something. Or the thing I've noticed, maybe this is a better way to put it, is like they're selling themselves to me even though I'm already there and they already have my money. Yeah. They're like telling me how good they are. I'm like, cool, show me like now.
Yeah.
Like, oh yeah, when I fished this tournament on this lake, we caught a bunch of 8-pound bass off this fallen tree. I'm like, cool, let's go do it instead of just talking about it.
Yeah.
Like that kind of thing.
Yeah. I think that's an insecurity thing.
Yeah.
And probably some inexperience too. Clients will often do the same thing, and they'll take you on a little iPhone safari and show you, everything that they've ever caught or shot right. or, traveled to. And sometimes they're doing it to reminisce. And I think that that's great and that's healthy, and I enjoy participating in that. But sometimes they're just trying to impress you.
Yeah.
And that doesn't. It doesn't impress me, and frankly, the things that impress me, it's like, are you able to go out here and have a good time?
Yeah.
And how can I help you do that better? Like I'm really impressed by the person who can communicate what they want, and what they want is realistic, and they want your help in the ways that you're able to give it to achieve that.
Yeah.
It's like, okay, now we're a team and we're working together, and I think that this is really fun. That's my absolutely favorite kind of client. And I think that that's fun. And it's totally fine if you want to if you want to show, your deer hunting guide the picture of the, massive deer that you got in, Kansas or Texas or Ohio or whatever. He might be really into that, and but more than likely he probably just wants to do the best job that he can for you at that time, he or
Right.
she. Yeah. Guiding's fun, and it's a customer service thing, like through and through, and you're dealing with a lot of unknowns. Like they're wild animals. You've got weather. You've got moon phases. Like you've got all kinds of things that you can't control. So I focus really hard on the things that I can. Like I want people to be warm, and I want them to have good food, and I want them to, feel like they've been heard and communicated what it is that they want or expect. And if that expectation changes, let's talk about that too,
right?
Because that's really fair as well. If it's day 3 and they're like, I think what I really want now is to just hunt with this particular style, or you're moving into the evening of a fishing trip and they're like, gosh, this has been great, but I just want to throw dry flies. It's like, okay, well, there's no hatch going on. We might not catch another fish. Is that cool with you? And they're like, yep. Like,
yeah,
here we go. We're throwing dries.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm guilty of that with fishing quite a bit, where I have placed a certain level of enjoyment on techniques, even though at the cost of like catching fish.
Yeah.
Where I'll just be like, this is just more fun. Just the physical technique of this is more fun to me than like doing something, say really slow and methodical, even though I know I'm probably going to catch more fish that way.
Yeah.
I'll be more satisfied if I get one fish, I don't care the size, whatever, say like on a topwater lure, just watching it blow up and hit something, even though I know I could probably catch more doing something less interesting to me. Yeah. Like I'll make that sacrifice.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's a good way to do it, is to communicate with that's the whole key, right? Is just communicating. It's like pretty much what I was saying with tattooing. I think like people always ask about, people passing out and stuff. I think like when people pass out, in my observation through all my years of working with different people, the guys that have people pass out like on a regular basis are the ones that are like, all right, now sit down, don't move, remember to breathe, don't squirm, all this kind of stuff. Like, man, you're just setting yourself up for someone that's not going to speak up if something is going wrong. If they're not feeling good, they're like, oh man, this dude just barked a bunch of orders at me. Now I don't feel so great. I don't want to tell him. He's just going to get mad. And then next thing you know, they're on the floor because they were afraid to speak up, but you don't want to put someone on the defense immediately. It's
I used to act super tough, and I do mean act, when I was getting tattooed. And now if I hit, a spot that hurts a lot, I'll say something. I'll be like, wow, that really hurts a lot.
Yeah. I can tell you as a tattooer, nobody cares if you're tough. It's like, it's more embarrassing to pretend like you're tough than to just be like, man, this shit sucks, Like, because you could just tell it's all phony. Like, it's exactly the cliche that you would think it is. Yeah. Like, the tough guys that come in all puffy, beating their chest, all this kind of thing. It's just like, man, just shut up and get tattooed. Like, nobody cares. I've been doing this 27 years. I've seen all you dudes. Like, I don't care. You're not impressing me. You know what impresses me? If you just lay there and get tattooed and don't act like it doesn't hurt,
Yeah.
Like, it's just funny. It's like, it's such a backfire. And I don't know who in their lives responds to this in a positive way. I had this conversation just the other day. I can't remember the context, but I was talking about all that puffing up and all that kind of stuff. And just like what, for me personally, like what a backfire all that is. Like, if some guy walks in a room just like, with the attitude and all this kind of thing, it's just like, I'm not sitting there thinking like, oh God, this guy looks like a tough guy. I better not mess with him. It's like, yeah, I'm not going to mess with him one way or another. So I'm never thinking of I'm going to mess with that guy no matter who the guy is. So that's already off the table. I don't care if they weigh 80 pounds or 280 pounds. I don't mess with people. I just mind my own business. So I don't want to mess with that guy. It's just a default setting in my brain.
Yeah.
So I don't care if you're like peacocking around. Like my reaction is usually like, well, yeah, I'm already not going to mess with anyone in here. So you just look dumb now to me, like that just looks sad. Like,
and I think it just comes from a place of insecurity.
Yeah.
And I understand that. And there's definitely been times in my life where I've felt that too. But
is it always insecurity though? Because I'm like, my brain wants to think that, and I think that is the case a lot of times. But I also feel like there has to be X amount of the puffed up guy population that genuinely thinks they're like badass and that people are afraid of them and that like this is working, like this thing I'm doing is working and I feel better and more confident and whatever, when in actuality, like at least speaking for myself, I'm just thinking like, one, I'm usually not even thinking,
right?
Like I just tune them out. That's one thing I can tune out like on my tune out scale. But like, I mean, working in tattoo shops, I guess I'm just saying from like, that's largely my experience with these guys, and it's usually just like, oh my God, like just shut up, like nobody cares,
Yeah, I mean, maybe it's not all insecurity. Maybe it's that they came from a place where they needed to act like that or felt like they needed to act like that in order to feel safe and comfortable or whatever. But yeah, I just try to have compassion for it. And I've worked and continue to work with people in the military space that are really tough people. People that, if you knew, you'd be just terrified to be around them. And a lot of those guys are just as calm and as mellow and laid back as can be. And they've got just nothing in the world to prove to anybody. And if it comes time for them to flip that switch, they've got it.
Yeah.
But they don't unless they need to.
Right. I guess maybe that's sort of the distinction for me, is that like this idea of being tough or not tough is just like, I don't know. I've managed to skirt through my 48 years without ever getting into a fight. I just avoid it. It's just not something is on my radar.
It's a great thing to do with fights, is to avoid them.
I mean, I'm talking like, I would say avoid, but I've really like, I've never even been in a position where I thought, oh, I'm going to have to look like a wimp now and back down. I just like never, like if I am even remotely around a situation that seems like it's going to be trouble, I just like leave, and even that hasn't happened very often. Like I don't know, it's probably the YouTube rabbit hole, and I saw these guys. I don't know if it was like, was it that, who's that ex-Navy SEAL that's on all the podcasts?
I don't know. There's a lot of SEALs that have a hard time shutting the hell up.
Jocko or whatever his name, that guy. I might have been him, but they were like talking about how to handle yourself like when you're at the club and some guy like grabs your girl or something along this lines. And I'm like, you dudes are all way too old to be in a club for starters. Like, let's talk about that instead of what to do, when you're, I was just like, and I just thought like, I've never even been in a position where it's like, oh, I've got to act tough, or I don't know. And anyway, I'm just going off on a tangent.
That probably wasn't Jocko. He's a good leader, and he definitely talks a lot about, especially within like the scope of jiu-jitsu, about using it as a tool to like break contact and get out of a problem rather than create one.
Did you know I'm the only tattooer on the planet that doesn't do jiu-jitsu?
It's gotten pretty popular.
Every tattooer I know does jiu-jitsu.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm exaggerating, of course, but like a lot of them.
Yeah. I mean, it's like a different version of yoga now. If there was a jiu-jitsu gym here, I would go. I'm interested in it.
I thought about it for a minute. I was tattooing a guy who was a jiu-jitsu instructor, and super nice guy. Really got along with him great. And I was having really bad anxiety problems at that time. I mean, I kind of always do, but they were like extra bad during this time. I was tattooing him, and he always was like super cordial about inviting me. He's like, "Hey, if you ever want to come, just watch or something, you know." And I considered it for a while, and my anxiety was getting so bad that I was like, I had even emailed him, and I was like, "Hey, man, how do you feel about jujitsu as a way to kind of curb anxiety?" He's like, "Oh, it's great. It's a great outlet for that, you know." And this, and he's like, "I know a lot of guys that use it for that or whatever." And I was so close, and then I don't know, I just couldn't take that leap. It just felt like such a foreign world to me, just so not part. I've never been in, and I know it's like a really broad stroke to say less like athletics, but like, you know, I that whole world. I've like never been into sports. I've never been into like group activities. Dude, I chase like insects around and stuff. Yeah. You know, that's like my jam. Like that's how I calm myself down. And I just never did it. I just couldn't. I couldn't like break through that mental barrier of like, this is just so different than any world I know, that I'm just. I think the idea of treating it for anxiety was making me anxious. So I never crossed that path with it.
Yeah.
You know, but I tattooed a lot of people that were into it, and yeah, like, you know, most were pretty cool. There were some of the, you know, puffy guys were part of it, and
yeah, and it's a good place for them to go get humbled too.
Right.
The Gracie family, you know, probably has had more of an impact about the popularity and changes to jiu-jitsu as anybody. And you know, I've got to hang out with Hoist Gracie a couple times, and he won like the first and third UFC where there were no weight limits. Nobody really knew what UFC was at the time. Yeah. So, you know, you had like sumo wrestlers and boxers.
Yeah.
And there was really no such thing yet as a mixed martial artist. But, you know, he was going in here and wearing a gi and submitting people with these crazy holds that nobody in the U.S. had ever seen before. And these are people that were a lot bigger than him. And it made everyone really give a close look to jiu-jitsu. Hoist is I would consider him to be a philosopher as much as anything. And he's a treasure to have around, and the shooting competitions that I've been involved with where he's there, you know, I feel really drawn to him, and I hang on every word that he has to say. But
is he into shooting? Is that
yeah. He likes shooting, loves America, loves freedom in any form that it takes. Yeah, he did really poorly at the first shooting competition, and he won the next time that he came. And you know, he's able to experience, you know, the full range of emotions. He's honest. On one of the hill climbs, he's like, "This sucks. I'm tired." Everybody else is like, "Oh, you know, it's all right. I've done worse." Yeah. He's like, "No, this is terrible."
Right. I love that. I'm really, really drawn to people that are like that.
Yeah.
I don't like facades. I don't like puffing and stuff like that. Because I feel like I'm very forthcoming about my weaknesses, and when I communicate with people and get a response back, especially as a tattooer, and I think that's part of like almost part of the customer service, is like sometimes you know, you got to read the room, right? You don't want to tell everyone all your problems and have it turn into a therapy session for yourself or whatever. But a lot of times, you know, if I can tell someone is really anxious, I'll talk about my own anxiety, you know, and like, hey, listen, it's cool. Like, we're going to make this as easy as possible. So I really appreciate when people are like, just own up to like, yeah, this sucks. Or like you said, like we were talking about before, you know, like when you get tattooed, you're like, dude, this sucks. Like, like I would much rather hear that than, someone just like toughing it out and, you know, like pretending, you know, it's like, I'd just rather have a normal conversation. But I'm always more drawn to people that have that kind of honesty about stuff.
Yeah. No, I mean, you and I have to finish my left arm and then start working on my right. But dude, I swear I'm already dreading the inside of my right elbow because that shit hurts.
Yeah.
But You know, I know going into it, and I'll be like, "Hey, man, that hurts. Can I take a second?"
Yeah. Yeah. But, you'll be fine.
Yeah. No,
but yeah, that's stuff, that's stuff I always encourage people not to be like apologetic about. And because you do, like you said, with guiding and stuff, you get that like, oh, I got all tangled. Oh, I'm so sorry. Like, yeah, I don't, like
it's
the amount of
stuff.
hassle someone would have to put me through where I was like, looking for an apology. Like, I'm so patient with that stuff.
Yeah.
Like, I get it. It's a scary situation. You're nervous, excited, you're nervous, like everything in between. Like, I respect the fact that that's something you have to go through. I'm not going to be judging, every once in a great while, there's, you get someone where you're like, they're just getting something easy on some easy spot and they're putting on the theatrics and stuff. And you're like, yeah, I kind of know for a fact this isn't that bad. I mean, everyone's different, so I shouldn't say that. But like, when they're like, oh man, this spot hurts worse than that. And I'm like, the whole thing's like a square inch. What are you talking about?
Yeah. I mean, we suffer in our imaginations. Okay. I've got 2 questions left.
Yeah.
Neither of them are that big, but how would you categorize your style? There's a few different buckets of like tattooing styles. You've got American traditional, and, various things. What bucket would you put yours in? Even though within that, I think what you do is unique.
Yeah. Well, I was gonna say, I think, for better or worse, I think one thing that I would say that would be kind of a positive note about what I do is that, without sounding too cocky or anything, is that I don't know that I could find a real, like, a lane to put it in, which I'm kind of proud of, you know, or at least like makes me feel good that it's hard, that's a hard question to answer. If I was just like, oh, I'm a neo-traditional guy, oh, I'm a biomech guy or whatever, there's nothing wrong with that at all. Like, those are great styles. I wear that stuff on me, like, whatever. But there is something nice about being like, that's hard to define, I don't know, like, when I got here, everyone, like, when I did the art show at the Josephi Center, all I heard was how dark my art was. I mean, one, it's just physically dark because I do pen and ink and stuff like that, and my tattoos are just black and gray. So I think by just lack of color, people assume that it's dark. But I read it more as like thematically dark, which, my piece for that show was a meadowlark on a old stump with a barn in the background, and I remember handing it to the woman, and she's like, "Oh my gosh, that's so intense. It's so dark." And I was like, "Is it? This is kind of the most lighthearted thing I've done in a while, because I got some other stuff that would probably seem way darker." Because I mean, I can think of tattooers that it's like straight up like gore and organs flying out of bodies and like just crazy stuff. Right. And I'm not really in that category. But I mean, I guess in general, like, I suppose I would lean more towards telling people my subject matter rather than necessarily the style. The style, I think, generally could be categorized as like, illustrative.
Yeah.
There's like a balance of, I like to use a good amount of line work. So it's usually got lines, which to me kind of defines it as illustration versus something that would be like more photorealistic or something along those lines. So I say, like, as a general word, illustrative would come up. But I usually would probably be more apt to talk about subject matter. I usually tell people, like, there's kind of 2 sides to my stuff. I love doing nature, little mountain scenes, plants, animals, insects, all those kind of things are my favorites. And then I'm always like, but I also have been like a crazy death metal head since I was like 15 years old. And so all that arena of subject matter is really stuff I love. So I'd love doing like a gnarly skull or, just stuff that, again, would be like considered thematically more dark.
Yeah.
And it doesn't get that crazy. It's usually skulls and, or something like a demon or something like I love doing that stuff too. And I like that I get to do both of those things or a combo. Like, I just did one the other day and the guy wanted like like an undead elk. That's kind of how he defined it. So that's almost a blend of those two things. Like, it was an elk, but it was like super weird, and I did weird shit with the antlers and all that kind of stuff. So yeah, I don't know. I think illustrative would be the easiest way to sort of category to slot it into.
That makes sense to me.
Yeah. Because that's one thing that I really don't like that's happened with tattooing, in which Instagram and just social media in general is pretty responsible for us. There's like maybe 8 lanes that people ride in, and I think most tattooers would answer you really easily and be like, oh, I'm a biomech guy. Oh, I'm a traditional guy. Oh, I do traditional Japanese, and all those styles are valid, but it's like I'll go through Instagram and because I've been doing it as long as I have, I'll be like, oh, this guy looks at these 3 artists.
Right.
They're the ones that laid the blueprint. Who knows if they even know who they are, really?
Yeah.
Like sometimes that's the case. There's a guy in Germany that basically started this whole like neo-traditional thing that's going on now, and I guarantee you like half of the guys doing it don't even know who he is. Because he's older. He's like my age and been doing it probably just as long or longer than I have. And he was like the first dude doing that, and then it just gets like, it's like a copy of a copy of a copy. You got this people now that are doing it, and they're copying this 3rd generation version of it, and they don't even know who started it, kind of thing. So there's a lot of that going on.
Yeah. Okay. Last question.
Yeah.
You ready?
I'm ready. I'm sitting down.
Okay. If somebody wants to get tattooed by you, how do they do it?
Oh, that's an easy question.
Yeah.
I do all my booking through my website, meadowlarktattoos.com.
Okay.
There's a real easy contact form you fill out. Just name, email, phone number, and what your concept is. And then I'm really good about getting back to people. I try not to let more than maybe 3-4 days go without answering emails. That would be like the most. I try and do them almost every day, though.
Cool.
Yeah.
Awesome. 10 out of 10 would recommend to a friend. I don't say that lightly. I don't say that because, I enjoy your friendship and your company and fishing with you and hanging out. Objectively, you're a good tattooer. It's something that I care about. A tattoo is something that you wear forever. And yeah,
I appreciate it. I don't take any of that stuff lightly. I mean, I was just saying, I say this to tons of clients all the time. Like, one of my absolute favorite parts, if not my absolute favorite part of tattooing, is getting to know clients, building relationships, having them leave where they had a way better experience than they were ever expecting. Like, all of those factors, like, that's what makes the job so awesome. Like, I love that part of it. Like, awesome. Everything else is like technical and kind of an uphill battle and can be a headache, but like, I can always come back to like, man, I tattoo some awesome people and like really love getting to know them. So
that's cool. Sweet, man.
Cool.
Well, thank you so much.
Yeah. Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Yeah.
And folks, if you already forgot that website, there's a link to it in the podcast description. You can click on that and it'll take you straight there. And a lot of people do fly in here and travel here to get tattooed by you. So this isn't a locals only thing.
No, I've had a lot of people do that, and it's a cool thing to kind of sell people on the idea, because it's an awesome place to come visit. You know, it's like, come see some amazing scenery and wildlife, and also get a tattoo.
Yep. Come spend some money, and please don't move here.
Yeah, just make sure you leave after you're done getting tattooed.
Thank you all very much for listening. I'm going to keep bringing you these stories from normal people just like you who have done extraordinary things. Everyone is an expert at something, and they have interesting perspectives on life and work and the environment and all of the things that we care about. I'm going to keep bringing that to you. And I want to thank you so much for making this show possible. I also want to thank Emily Bratcher for producing this show. She does a great job editing. Really appreciate her. I want to thank John Chatelain. He did the art for the Six Ranch podcast. And Celia, soon to be Harlander, she digitized that so that we can get it out there on the internet for you. Also want to thank Justin Hay for writing this original music and the beautiful whistling that you're listening to right now. You guys are awesome. thank you so much. Please keep listening to the show. Write me a review if you feel like it, and just keep doing your thing, and we'll all learn from this together. It's been fun, and we're just getting started.